In the previous video, we continued working on our player behavior script. And in addition to that, we created a script for bullets. So right now, our player can move around, rotate towards the camera, and shoot towards the camera. Oh, I'm saying camera, sorry. Shoot and rotate towards the mouse position. Also, these bullets are really fast. I should change that. Let's make this 10. I guess that's better. But anyway, now in this video, at least starting with this video, cause this topic is gonna take a few, like 3 videos. But starting with this video, we're gonna start creating enemies for our project. Now, how should I explain this? In the previous project, all we needed to do is dodge the obstacles that continue to move left and right. This time, we're gonna create a system similar to the classic Space Invaders. With one calling of a function, we will spawn multiple enemies in the shape of a grid, just like in Space Invaders. Today we're just gonna cover enemy spawning 101. That means at the start of the game, our enemies will spawn in a grid formation. That's all. That's all we're gonna do in this video. Where the enemies are not gonna move, not yet. They're not gonna spawn in endless waves, not yet. Just spawning at the start of the game. So, in the Space Invaders game, the enemies, at least I should say, the enemy wave moves as one unit. So individual enemy instances don't move individually. So to create that feeling, first we're gonna create a prefab for our enemies. Then we're gonna create an empty object. An enemy manager, I should say, that will allow us to move our enemies as one unit. Let's just real quick create our enemy object, copying the player object like we did with the blood object. Let's call it enemy. This time we won't forget about removing the player controller script. Next, we can create a new material for our enemy. Oh, wrong one. Let's just make it red, cause why not? Now, is there anything I'm missing? I don't think I am. But anyway, if I am missing something, I'll notice it in the video. Now let's drag our enemy into our prefabs folder to make it a prefab. Then, just like we said, we're gonna create an empty object, an enemy manager. Since we want our enemies to move as a unit instead of moving individually, our enemy movement behavior is gonna be handled not by the enemy script, but by the enemy manager script. So let's create a script for enemy manager and get to coding. first things first, assigning our enemy prefab, public game object, enemy prefab. Oops, wrong file. Next, we're going to create two variables for our spacing between enemies. So we'll write private float spacing x. Actually, let's write it like this. Spacing x and 2f. Will that be enough? I'm sure it will be enough. And then do the same for z-axis. Since we want to spawn our enemies in a grid, we want to make so there is some space between the enemies. That's why we have our two spacing variables. Then, to make sure that our wave is centered, not to the left or right of the screen, we'll create a center position. We'll write private vector3 position vector3, or x value will be 0, or y value will be 0.6. This is to prevent our enemies from colliding with the ground object. And then for the z value, we'll give it 10. This will be our anchor point. An anchor point where the entire formation, entire wave will be built around. Alright, and then next we're going to create a function that will handle our enemy spawning. In our player behavior, we created any individual function for our movement, rotation and shooting, and even our shootability, the shooting itself. We'll do the same with the enemy spawning. Private void spawn, you could say spawn wave. Then we'll call this in the start method. Now going back to our grid structure. If we want to make our enemies spawn in a grid, we need two variables, two values. One will be, actually, hold on, let me finish this. First will be rows, or rows value, with the rows representing these. How should I explain it? For example, in this structure, there are 5 rows. No, hold on, that's not right. In this structure, there are 3 rows. One being this row, the other being this, and the third being this. On the other hand, our other value will be our columns. For example, in this structure we have 5 columns. The first being this, the second column, the third column, the fourth and fifth. We want our rows and columns to be random, so that we can avoid making our game boring. So let's start writing in our spawn wave method by creating our rows and columns. or rows and or columns. To assign random values to these two values, we'll write random range, or rows should be a range of 2 to 5, and for columns, let's make them from 2 to 10. Actually, it will be better if we did 4 to 10. Then, in order to keep our wave or formation centered and not to the left or right, we need to have a hold of our formations width, width, and height. We'll use a little bit of math in order to calculate our formation size. To determine how wide our formation is, we'll write float width. We'll take our columns and then take one out, and finally multiply it with our spacing x. It's the same format with our height, but instead of columns, we'll use rows. Columns, rows, and there we go. Now that we have these values, all we need to do is start spawning our enemies in a grid. To create the formation of a grid, we'll need to use 4 loops. One for loop for our rows and one for our columns. Let's create the structure. So we'll write for int current row 0. If current row is bigger than rows, then add 1 to current row. And inside this, we'll create the second for loop, int current column 0. Now, to keep things centered, for each row and column in our grid, in our formation, we will be calculating an offset that will show us where to place each object, each enemy relative to the center. We'll write vector3 offset. Yeah, we can write offset. Then new vector 3. Alright, here we go with math. Current row multiplied by spacing x. Subtract it by our weights, and then finally divide it by 2. Just like we did with the player, the y value is irrelevant, so we're gonna just leave it as 0. Then the same format, but with our columns. Actually, hold on. These need to switch places. Current column. Then here we're gonna start with current row height. I hope that's correct. But anyway, if it's not, we're gonna see when we test the code anyway. Now all we need to do is start actually spawning our enemies. With each run of our 4 nested to for loops, we're gonna run an instantiate. We're gonna create an enemy prefab. Its position will be center position, which we've declared right here. And to that, we're gonna add the offset. For rotation, we're just gonna leave Cartesian identity, because we don't want to mess with the enemy object's rotation. And finally, as the last value, we'll write transform. You can see in the description right here that this transform stands for the parents of the objects spawned. We want all the enemies to move as one unit, so we're gonna make all the enemies children of our enemy manager. The enemy manager will be our enemy's parent. I think that's it. So let's go back to our editor and see if this works. Ideally, when we start the runtime, at the top of our screen, enemies should be spawning. There it is. Now, are these random? Right now, it's 4 to 8. This is a 4 to 8 grid. So when I start the runtime again, this should be different. Now it's 4 to 5. Again, it's 2 to 4. In the next video, we're gonna try making these objects move. Also, the bullet is still very fast. I need to change that again. Let's make it 8, no, 6. Jeez, why is that so fast? Also, I am not sure why most of my bullets are not hitting the enemies. Let's try to fix that. We'll make this 2. It could be because the bullets were too fast. Now that the bullets are reasonably slower, they are not phasing through our enemies. There we go. This is a better speed. We will stick with this bullet. There we go. We will stick with this bullet speed.